Hello, everyone. Let's get started. My name is Jonathan Lossis. I'm the director of the Living Earth Collaborative. It's a biodiversity partnership between WashU, the zoo, and the Missouri Botanical Garden. And tonight, in conjunction with the St. Louis Academy of Sciences, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Jane Melville. Now, as soon as Jane starts speaking, you'll realize that she's not from around here. In fact, she's from a long way away. She's from Tasmania, which you may know is a cold, mountainous island off the south coast of Australia. Jane did her undergraduate and graduate work at UTAS, studying an aptly named species of lizard, the snow skink. You don't think of lizards living around snow, but this one comes as close as most do. Now, if you know anything about the subject of tonight's talk, which is not up here, you know that dragon lizards in Australia do not occur in cold, mountainous, snowy places. You think of them in hot places like the many hot deserts of Australia. And so the question you might have is, how did Jane get from studying cold climate lizards to warm climate lizards? And that's where my part in the story comes in. In 1996, I visited Australia, and I met Jane while she was still doing her graduate studies. And I was so impressed with the work she was doing that I offered her a postdoctoral fellowship to come here to Washington University to continue her lizard work. And so in June of 1998, Jane left the middle of the Tasmanian winter and arrived 24 hours later in the middle of a St. Louis heat wave. And it almost killed her, but she did survive, and that allowed her to transition to studying warm climate lizards, which she has done for the rest of her career. And as a result, she's gone on to become the world's leading authority on Australian dragon lizards. After spending 3 years here in St. Louis, Jane returned to Australia and now works at the Natural History Museum at Melbourne, Museum Victoria, where she has risen in rank to the position of Senior Curator of Terrestrial Vertebrates. Along the way, she has established expertise in molecular and developmental biology and has become one of the major players working for the conservation of Australian reptiles and amphibians. Jane's accomplishments are many. She has mentored an extraordinary number of undergraduate and graduate students and postdoctoral fellows, many who have gone on to become scientists of their own. She has received numerous grants totaling millions of dollars. She has published more than 60 papers. And perhaps most significantly, Jane just had her first book published last month, The Dragon Lizards of Australia, lavishly illustrated with beautiful pictures as well as full of information. You can buy it now on Amazon. I highly recommend it. I should mention one last thing. Jane is spending this fall here in St. Louis and elsewhere in the United States on a Fulbright Fellowship. Sadly, her time here in St. Louis is more than half over, and I should point out as well that her husband and 2 children are here in the audience. So Jane's work has immeasurably advanced our understanding and conservation of Australia's herpetological fauna. We're very fortunate to have her here tonight to tell us about her work to discover and preserve that rich biodiversity, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Melville.
that there is in Australia. The other thing you might not know about Australia is it's the land of lizards. If you think of Australia in terms of animals, you might think of koalas, deadly snakes, crocodiles, big things that want to eat you. But actually, we're the land of lizards. There are more lizard species in Australia than any other country on Earth. Over 1,000 species. And that makes up about 10% of all the lizards on Earth. So 1 in 10 lizards that are found on Earth are found in Australia. And almost all of them, 90% of them or so, are found nowhere else but Australia. They're just found on Australia. And of all those lizards, of those 1,000 or so species, 102 of them are dragon lizards. And around here I've just put some photos of some really fantastic lizards around Australia. This is a bit of a snippet of the different diversity. From the great big huge monitor lizards here down to some of the smallest skinks. Although if you're down on this side you might be able to see down in this corner. Now, the dragon lizards. Other parts of the world, dragon lizards, we just call them dragon lizards in Australia. Other parts of the world, they're called agamas, or the scientific name for them, which is agamid lizards. Here's an Australian bearded dragon, and this is where they're found across the world. The Australian and Papua New Guinean radiation here is its own independent evolutionary lineage, which means it's different to all the other agamid lizards or dragon lizards elsewhere in the world, found through Asia, the Middle East and Africa. And their closest relatives, the closest relatives of the dragon lizards, are actually the chameleons. The chameleons are a weird and wonderful group that can change colour, they've got weird shapes, but they're the closest relative of the dragon lizards, and they're found in Africa and southern Asia. And then the cousins to the chameleons and the Australian dragon lizards are the iguanas. And you probably all know iguanas, they're found in the Americas, and here's a map of them here. I think they have some of the coolest distributions of any lizard in the world, because you get them in South America, North America, then over here in Madagascar, for some reason, they're over there, and then over in Fiji. You get iguanas over in Fiji. Seems the craziest distribution for a lizard group to me, but that's where the iguanas are found, and they're cousins to the chameleons and the dragon lizards. So that's just a rundown on what a dragon lizard is, if anyone ever asks you. So, just a brief outline of what I'm going to talk about tonight, dragons and a few other things. But I wanted to give you a rundown on the diversity of Australian dragon lizards and where they're found. And I thought I'd do this by giving you a bit of a picture of the field work I've done across different environments in Australia. It was hard to choose what to talk about, so I've just picked a couple. I've picked tropical areas and arid areas. Then a little bit of biology as we go, a few fun facts. If you're ever at a party or something and need some fun fact about dragon lizards, listen tonight, because I'm going to give a few fun facts. And then I'm going to finish up with something about conservation and the importance of scientists working with local communities and the power local communities have in understanding their lizards or their animals, their environment, in the conservation of those animals. So when you think about dragon lizards or lizards in Australia and where you might have the highest diversity, often people think of rainforests and tall trees, wet rainforests. But in Australia, that's not quite true. You get the most number of species of lizards in Australia in the deserts, and also up in the tropics, but not the tropical rainforests, in the tropical savannas. A bit like the savannas you get in Africa, but they're the monsoon tropical savannas of Australia. So this is just a very simplified map of the different environments in Australia. So in the dark orange around here, we have the really true deserts. And across this dotted line here is the Tropic of Capricorn. So the top third of Australia is actually in the tropics. And up across here are the tropical savannas that I was talking about. So quite a bit of northern Australia is tropical savannas. And this is a monsoon climate, so it has high monsoon rains in summer and then dry, more arid times across winter. So first of all, I'm going to zoom in and do a bit of a rundown on different field work I've done. And I'm going to start with the tropical savannas. And this area up here, which is called Arnhem Land. Now, Arnhem Land is a really interesting area in Australia. It's really remote, not very explored, little is known about it. Here's a zoomed-in map. So this is Kakadu National Park here. You might have heard of Kakadu National Park. It's a very popular place for people to go to. Next door to that, to the east, is Arnhem Land. And this is all native title land, which means it is owned by the traditional owners. They run this land, they own it, it is their land. And you cannot go into it without their permission. And as scientists, you need to work with the local traditional owners to be able to go and work in there. There is so much to be explored in there. We know so little about a lot of the animals that live in there. And very high diversity of species. I was lucky enough to work with some ornithologists and some local traditional owners on their family's land. And this is what it looks like. It's tropical savannas and it's on sandstone escarpment, which means this pale sandstone here and this woodland and grassland. And we normally do our work in the build-up. This is right before the monsoon starts. So it's right at this time of the year, actually. The monsoon starts usually at the beginning of November because, of course, it's spring in Australia at the moment because it's at the other end of the world. And it's usually about 45 degrees each day, which might be, 110, 115, I'm not sure on the conversions. And the humidity is usually up around 90%. It is horrendous to work in, but the lizards love it. And this is where we camped for our trip. We were there for 2 weeks. And when you're out in the middle of nowhere, a place like Arnhem Land, it's camping. And it was about a 3.5-4 hour drive out to the nearest little settlement called Owenpelly. This place that we stayed at here was special. It's called Kikikiao by the local family, which means baby bird dreaming. And it's a special women's business area. So we were really lucky to be able to work here. This is just some of the things you get out here. This is a termite mound. This is built by little tiny ant-like termites. They are amazing. Up in northern Australia, they build these huge structures. And some of them are really narrow, long structures oriented north to south. So they get the eastern sun in the morning to warm up. So they're just amazing. And the way we catch a lot of the lizards out here is we put in trap lines. And the lizards fall in a bucket, which I'm going to show you. But we're working in this grass here. This is called spinifex grass, and it's across most of arid Australia. A lot of different species, but it's very prickly. It's got sharp prickles on it, like pins. And this is the family we worked with on their land. Reverend Peterson here and his son Manuel were helping us. And here's a trap line that we've put in to catch lizards. So we put this little, it's called a drift fence. It's just made out of fly netting. We peg that up and a lizard comes wandering along here and then falls in a bucket, and we can pick it up out of the bucket. So that's the way we catch lizards. Because this dense spinifex grass, it's almost impossible to otherwise catch a lizard. And I thought I'd give a rundown on the different families of lizards you get in Australia. So we have dragon lizards, and we have a few different families. And I thought I'd just use some of the examples of those families that we found up in Arnhem Land. So this is a common blue-tongued skink. It's widely distributed across Australia. It's a big skink, about this big. And skink, there are more skink species than any other type of lizard in Australia. There are about 450 different species of skinks, and they range in size from tiny little one like this to these big ones like these blue-tongued skinks. Also the goannas and the monitor lizards. So these are another group of lizards that are very diverse in Australia and range in size from the smallest one is one of the smaller goanna species up to one that's 2.5 metres long. So this group also includes the largest lizard in the world, which is the Komodo dragons. This little guy here is a spiny-tailed monitor. And there are some beautiful geckos in Australia. So this is a giant cave gecko, and you can see its toes here. It's got big toe pads on it, which let it walk around on the ceiling and things like this. We caught this one in one of the caves at Kikikau. Another gecko group are the phasmid geckos. They're called phasmid geckos. Phasmids are stick insects because they look a bit like stick insects. And they live on the spinifex grass. This is spinifex grass. And you can see they've got these funny little pory hands that allow it to climb around on the spinifex grass. And this actual lizard here was the first one I'd ever seen in the wild. We were out with torches at night and I saw this, and it was very exciting. And it turned out it was a new species. And this has been described as a new species by one of my colleagues, Paul Oliver, and it's been called Strophaurus horneri after Paul Horner, who was the curator at the Darwin Museum and was on this trip with me. So the individual lizard was a new species. Very exciting. And another kind of gecko you get in Australia are these big ground-dwelling geckos. And you can see they've got no toe pads. These guys would not be able to climb a tree. They just live on the ground. And this one we caught walking around at night. One of the ornithologists with us, she'd go out looking for lizards at night with us. And it was dark and we heard this shriek. And she's like, "There's a huge lizard and it's got no tail." I came running and it was this one. You can see their knob tails. But this gecko, it's a big gecko. It's like this big. It's huge. And these are legless lizards. So it looks a bit like a really strange snake. But these are actually related to geckos. These are kind of like geckos with no legs. This one's called a Burton's lizard, and it has this really weird pointy snout. Now, here's one of the fun facts. This one specialises on eating lizards, and it can eat really big lizards for its body size, and it's got a joint on the top jaw and the bottom jaw, so it can open that long pointy snout both ways, so it can open its mouth top and bottom and eat really, really big lizards. But they have a really big distribution. It's actually got the largest distribution of any lizard in Australia and a lot of variations. So there are people looking at this at the moment, this species, to see if it's actually multiple species, not one, because there's so much variation in it. But what we actually came to Arnhem Land to look for is this species of dragon lizard, Slater's ringtail dragon. And it's a pretty big dragon lizard that lives on the sandstone escarpment. This is a photo of it up close. Now, I'm hoping people can see down here, I've put a distribution map for all the species of dragon lizards down here with the name and also the person that photographed it. Rich Glore came on this field trip, so a lot of these photos are Rich's, and he's actually over at Kansas. He's the curator at the museum over there. He's almost local. Anyway, we came to find this, and if you can see the distribution map, the reason is there's these isolated populations up in Arnhem Land that look very different to the populations across the rest of northern Australia. And we wanted to come and look at these and to see, is this a different species to these ones across here? Because if we look at the ones further south, this is what they look like. So this one was photographed over here. This is Wolf Creek Crater in the background here. And you can see it, these lizards are normally this reddish kind of colour, quite well matched to the rock colour. And you look back here, these match to the colour of this paler sandstone. So we worked on these and we came to the conclusion that they're all the same species. It's just that they're very variable and they tend to match their background where they're living. But that was the reason we went up there. But there were other really cool dragon lizards. This is a photo of a two-lined dragon, and this is a male. Now in dragon lizards, the males often get beautiful colours, really bright colours, and they love to attract attention. They sit up on something, they sit up on a perch so they can be seen. They want the females to think they look fantastic. And the other thing is they sit up on a perch so they can see other males, to keep other males out of their territories. So this is another two-lined dragon sitting at the top of a termite mound. And this is quite a common place to see these little guys. Now just to give you an example of the differences between the males and females in Australian dragons, this is a species I actually named a few years ago. I named this Horner's dragon, again after Paul Horner from the museum up in Darwin. And this is a female. It has kind of a pattern that when it's in the trees and things, you wouldn't be able to see it. It's quite well camouflaged. Now, just a bit of information about naming this species. It looks quite similar to quite a number of the other species up there, but genetics told me that this was a new species that was different to anything else. And I found one thing about what it looked like that it was different. It had a white spot. Can anyone see the white spot that made it different to anything else? Oh, I can see hands up there. There's a white spot on its ear. All of these have a white spot on its ear there that is different to anything else up there. So if you see a white spot on an ear of one of these big dragons, it's the Horner's dragon. And this is a female, whereas this is a male of the same species. So you can see the difference in the colouring. It's really bold colouring. And they'll sit up on these perches like this so they can be seen. And the other thing, they have a great repertoire of behaviours. They do head bobs, they do hand waves. They're actually often called tartar lizards. And in Australia, tartar means goodbye. I don't know if it's similar here, but they're called tartar lizards because they wave a lot. And they do push-ups and head bobs, and it still attract attention. They want to be looked at. And this is one of the most common species that you get up there. And I don't know if you recognise it like this, because it's not quite the same as what you normally see in the photos. This is the way you normally see it out and about, is on trees like this, trying not to be seen. But then if you catch it on the ground, this is what it will do. It puts out its big flare. It's the frill-necked lizard. I've got another fun fact about this, is the frill is extended by, it's got a modified hyoid bone, that's a tongue bone. We've got them up in the top of our throat here. It's got long extensions and it's modified, and when it opens its mouth, that's when the flare comes out. So you will never see a frill-necked lizard with its frill out, but its mouth closed. It has to open its mouth for the frill to come out. Just on that theme, this is my favourite road sign they have in the Northern Territory. Wholly appropriate, they use a dragon lizard. And from that ends our little information session about the Monsoon Tropics. And from here we're going to head down south into the sand deserts. And down here into the Great Victoria Desert in Western Australia. Now this is a zoomed in map of this area. So this is the Great Victoria Desert here. There's a number of reserves in there. We went out to do work on a big field trip out here at Neil Junction along this big purple line, which is the Beetle Highway. So if we head that direction, we get to the west coast and Perth, but we're out in the middle of nowhere. It's probably 1,000 kilometres east of Perth, and it's very remote. First of all, we went, if you look here, there's these lakes here, and this is what the lakes look like out here. They're salt lakes, so they only get water in them perhaps once every 10 years or so. And even though that looks like water up ahead there, it's actually not, it's a mirage. It gets so hot out here, you can get it, it looks like water, but it's not. And we went out there to find this dragon lizard. This is the claypan dragon lizard. Don't know why it's called claypan, because it's actually found on the salt lakes. And these lizards are amazing in the harsh environment they can survive in. It is so salty out there, but they're able to run around and live their life out there. And often when you catch them, they have salt crusting out of their nostrils. They have amazing ability to get rid of the salts in the environment. So we headed out east, and this here is the Beetle Highway. I always like in Australia, they're positive about how they name their roads, but this is the Beetle Highway. And we're heading out to Neil Junction here. And we were going out to do this field survey, and it was a big collaborative project. And this is the kind of desert that was out here. This is sand desert, and perhaps more what you think about when you think about Australian deserts. And again, the spinifex is here again. There is spinifex grass everywhere across Australian arid region. And on the way out there, we got this little guy. This is the thorny devil. And this actual animal is the one on the cover here. So this little one was caught on the road on the Beetle Highway out to Neil Junction. He was just walking across the road. And they always walk around with their tails straight up in the air like that. And they walk like little clockwork animals. They have really big distribution, you can see here across much of arid Australia, but in the sand deserts. And we got out to Neil Junction, and this was a big trip. It was with the Western Australian Parks Department, and also the local traditional owners again. And it was also a trip that people could pay to come along and help work on. So they could bring out their own four-wheel drive. So there are quite a few retired people that came along on this trip and helped us. It was fantastic. And their enthusiasm was amazing. So everyone pitched in together, and it was pretty rough and ready. You know, cook over the campfire and everyone eating the camp cooked food. But then we got down to the science. So everyone would go out and help check the buckets for the lizards, and we would come back and help people identify them. So here's one of the couples that paid to come along on the trips, and they helped identify the animals with us, and they'd record the data. And this is one of the officers from the Parks Department. So everyone worked in together. I think it was a fantastic experience of how community can help with understanding the diversity that's in their area. Just a few of the fun biology facts about dragon lizards. Now, reproduction. All of the Australian dragons lay eggs. They all lay eggs. Usually they lay 2 clutches of eggs each year in spring, and they're laid in shallow burrows. You can see here a female digging a burrow to lay eggs. And their lifespan is really variable. There are many species, like some of the smaller ones, that are called annual species, which means they usually only live one summer season, spring and summer season. They usually don't make it over the second winter to their second year. Even in captivity, when they're raised in captivity, they might only live 3 or 4 years. And at the other extreme, you have long-lived lizards that can live 15, 20 years. So here's an example of one of the lizards we were catching out in the sand deserts. That's one of these annual species. These little lizards that run around on the sand dunes. They're mallee lizards, and they might only live 1 year. But then at the other extreme, you have the big bearded dragons. This is a central bearded dragon. This is the one that you get in the pet shops here. And this lives quite a long time. I'm not sure how long it lives in captivity. I don't keep... You guys probably actually know more about keeping these lizards at home than I do. But in the wild, you can get some that are 8, 9 years old. And some of the water dragons in eastern Australia have been recorded up to 20 years old. This one I found, it's sitting up on top of a spinifex bush just south of Alice Springs in central Australia. It was just sunbaking in the morning. But life in the desert can be cut short. And one of the reasons is things eat you. And you see these big guys everywhere across the deserts. This is a sand goanna. You can tell the sand goannas, they have the yellow tip on the end of the tail. And they love eating lizards. Steve Wilson got this photo, and this is a bicycle dragon, or what was a bicycle dragon, sticking out of a sand goanna. So life can be tough out in the desert. So from Neil Junction, we headed out. This is a picture of us heading south down towards the Great Australian Bight. And you get these water tanks here that out in the middle of nowhere that are there to try and save lives, people. You've got to carry all your water and all your fuel. And it's pretty remote out there. You've actually got to calculate how long you can go out into the field based on fuel and water, not on anything else. And most of these water gathering tanks we'd come across are actually empty. So it rains so little that they just don't fill up. So yes, that kind of environment, you've just got to be really careful. And if you don't have water, you're in trouble, or fuel for that matter. So the other kind of desert I'm going to talk about tonight is stone desert. So we're just talking about sand desert, and this is where the sand deserts are in arid Australia. But you can see there's a whole lot of desert left over that's not those sand deserts. And one of the common kinds of desert that you get out there is stone desert, which we call Gibber desert. I'm not quite sure where Gibber comes from, but I call it Gibber desert. And so this is an aerial shot of some of the stone desert you get. You get these desert ranges, these rocky ranges out in the desert, and then just expanses of stone with spinifex grass again, and some woodlands. And this is some of the Gibber desert you get. This is what it looks like. Going out and doing field work in this area is challenging. And you might think, what lives out here? What on earth would be silly enough to live out here? Dragon lizards. And this is one of the species here. Can you see it? Yeah? This is a pebble mimic earless dragon. And it is one of the coolest lizards. It really does look like a pebble. Now, only little like this, and there's about 5 species of them now. It used to be all one species, but we've split them up into about 5 species. And they're amazing. They've even got kind of darker shadows around the edges of its body to make it even more like a pebble, and this pale tail to look like a stick. But, as with all dragons, they like to be seen, and even the pebble mimic dragons will get up and have a look at things. This is a 4-pawed dragon, earless dragon, again that lives on these stony deserts and cracking clay deserts, widely distributed across the eastern arid area. And this is a fairly common stance in the earless dragons. They're little lizards, and I think this is a way they can get up and see the world. And we call this a tripod stance. So they'll stand up on their back legs like that. Also, these lizards, these dragon lizards, are in some of the hottest environments in Australia. We were measuring ground temperatures when these guys were out and running around that was up over 70 degrees centigrade, which I have no idea what that is in Fahrenheit, but that's really, really hot. And so these lizards are able to survive in these kind of temperatures. And by using these tripod stances, they're touching the ground as little as possible. The other thing with the rock-dwelling species out in these rocky deserts that don't have much tree cover is predators can see you more. And one of the big predators of lizards in these rocky deserts are aerial predators or birds of prey, and they'll cruise around looking for lizards. So the dragon lizards, which love to be seen and they love to look pretty, one way they've solved this is a lot of their colours out in these deserts is underneath. So you can see this one here, which is a peninsular dragon. It's got beautiful colours under its chin. And then it will do push-ups and hand waves and all kinds of things so it can be seen but not from above. So if we look at a tawny dragon down in the Flinders Ranges, you can see that its back is very plain up on its back, but on its sides and its throat it's very coloured. And one of the reasons it does that is so that a bird flying across is going to have more trouble seeing it. Whereas a lizard on the ground, looking at this male tawny dragon, will be able to see those colours and is going to be really impressed. And you can see this one. This one is mid-push-up. This is a 4-legged push-up here it's doing. And along with that, it's distended its throat and it's waving its tail. They do tail waves as well. So they have some pretty impressive displays. And just to finish up about stony deserts, here's me walking across a Gibber plain. My husband took this photo, looking for pebble dragons. And there are a lot of pebbles there and not many dragons, and they are really, really hard to find because they really do look like pebbles and they see you coming. You know, they might be sitting up on a rock like this, but they see you from a distance and they crouch down doing their pebble mimic. So it can be difficult to find them. So I'm kind of going to finish up tonight with a section about conservation, because what I've talked about so far has been talking about remote Australia, out in the wilderness. But I'm going to zoom in on Eastern Australia here. Now you might know that many of the people living in Australia actually live in these blue and green zones around the edge, where it's the climate is better. There's high rainfall, it's cooler. And so I'm going to look at the conservation issues of a particular group here and the important role of the local community in this. And I've been working with the Pittsworth Land Care Group for about 10 years now. They actually contacted me. They love their dragon lizard out there. It's an earless dragon, and they have done so much for this dragon over the last 15 years. It was rediscovered out there. No one really knew it was there, and they got on board and they promoted this lizard. They put up road signs so people would be aware. They ran community days out looking for this earless dragon. They even made chocolates. They sold enough chocolates that they could contact me and say, "We have money, could you come out and study our lizard? We've sold chocolates so we can pay for you to come out because we think it's its own species. We think it's different to anything else. Could you come and do a study on it, please?" So I did. So until I started working on it, it was part of the four-pawed earless dragon species. And that's all these purple squares here. So I came out and started working on it to look at these ones out in the Darling Downs where the Land Care Group was. This is where that green star is, the Darling Downs. Down here, Pittsworth. And when I'd been studying it, I realised that it wasn't just that one that was its own species. There was actually another species over here that no one knew about, over here on the Darling Downs. So there's actually two new species. So I described those species. And this is the one that was out west, the yellow dots, out round Roma. It's the Roma earless dragon. Tympanocryptus, which is the scientific name for earless. Tympanum and cryptic means hidden eardrum. Tympanum is another word for eardrum. And wilsoni. I named it after Steve Wilson, who's actually the co-author of my book here. But he first collected these. He first discovered this population out near Roma. And so I described this species. And then I described the one that they'd asked me to come and work on, their earless dragon out on the Darling Downs, which is now called Tympanocryptus condominensis, or the condamine earless dragon. And this is it here. So we went out and did field work after that. We named them, but that's only one step. We went out to go and look at their conservation and biology. So this is out near Roma, working on the Roma earless dragon, and this is the habitat they live in. You can see how heavily degraded this is. This is what you call grazing country in Western Queensland. This is cattle grazing that does this. So they actually graze cattle on this land, which is pretty amazing. But we're collecting some data on an earless dragon down here. And this is the Darling Downs around Pittsworth, and this is the habitat those lizards live in. And it's cropping area, you can see the crops here, and they manage to survive in these areas between the crops and the road. This is their habitat, this is it. This is all they have. This is what their habitat looks like now. And also, when I was up there, I went and gave talks at the local pubs. This is the Pittsworth Land Care Group here, and I went and gave a talk about the research I'd done on how I described the species, and the enthusiasm and the interest of the local community was just really powerful. And this is a map of the area around Pittsworth, and in grey, the grey areas are the area that is either already cleared for agriculture, or it is a designated cleared area to be cleared for agriculture. The green areas are the remnant protected habitats. The red dots is where this lizard occurs. So you can see that there's not much area that is protected, actually no area. It doesn't occur in any of the protected areas at all. So working with the Pittsworth Land Care Group and the local parks, Queensland Park Service people, we have now managed to get them listed as threatened and endangered. So the Condamine earless dragon around Pittsworth is now listed as endangered at an international level, the federal Australian level, and also the state level. And the Roma earless dragon is listed as endangered on the international red list, and in the state of Queensland, as vulnerable. So it was the Pittsworth Land Care Group. This is a photo with some of them. They made up that sign to go on our cars. So we were the dragon wagon going around doing our field work out there. And this is my Ph.D. student, Curator, who's been working on the lizards out there. Curator from the Queensland Museum. Steve Wilson, my co-author in the book, and also some of the local community there. And so their enthusiasm and their passion for their local lizard got it from, they raised the money themselves selling chocolates and tea towels, got it from being named through to it being listed at an international level as endangered. So without their passion and their work on that, that just wouldn't have happened. So just a recap on what I've talked about. Of course, dragons are amazing. I hope I've managed to convince you of that. And the diversity of them in Australia is in the arid area and the tropical savannas, and that most of them are in really, really remote areas. And I hope you remember some of the fun facts I gave you, and just the importance of knowing your local animals and getting involved. And it really does help. It really can make a difference, and I think those darling down lizards are a perfect example. And just to finish, Jonathan's already said, but there's my dragon book. It's available on Amazon, I think. Unfortunately, because it got published after I left Australia, I haven't actually got any. I've just got a copy here. Anyone can come and have a look at if they would like. But thank you for coming along. It's been fantastic. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has a few questions. Yes? Okay, I'll just repeat the questions because this is being recorded, but are any of the dragon lizards dangerous? Are they poisonous or venomous or? No. There has been some work that showed there was a rather big splash paper that said dragon lizards are venomous, but what they do have is they have a protein in their saliva that starts digestion before whatever they're eating reaches their stomach. They're not actually venomous like a snake is venomous. Some of them can give a really nasty bite that will do damage. The frill-necks, you might have seen that they've got really big teeth and they're really strong. I got bitten by an adult central bearded dragon because they're a bit bitey. They're not like the ones you get in pet shops, they do bite. And it felt like I had slammed my finger in a car door or something. I lost feeling on the end of my finger for a while there. But they're not venomous, they're not going to do damage in that way. And they're not like the big monitor lizards that can really do serious damage. I can see a question up the back there. I'll repeat the question. There is the friction between human use of habitats and out in the remote wilderness areas and the protection of animals, and yes, there is. And it's in a number of ways, particularly mining out in some of the arid areas, out the Great Victoria Desert, where that trip we were doing was actually funded by a mining company because they wanted to get approval to put a mine, and they needed to show that the species that they would disturb in their mine were also found in the Neil Junction Nature Reserve to get their approval. So that is a problem. And also the grazing, because they graze, as you saw in Western Queensland, they graze animals on very substandard, it's spinifex grass, but they graze animals. Some of the best land I've seen out there is actually the native title land. It's some of the lowest impacted land out there. I think down here. Yes. Basically, yes, there's no question about it. It lives in grasslands, and the eastern grasslands in Australia, 98% of them have gone. So they extend from Melbourne up to Queensland in the Condamine area, and virtually all the grasslands are gone. So it's habitat loss is why they're endangered. Right up the back there. The question was, do I feel, is there an area of dragon lizard research that needs to be explored, and where I would like it going in the future? You know, when I was writing this book, I realised that even for the most common and best known of the species, such as the central bearded dragon, we know so little about it in reality. We know about it, how to keep it in captivity, but when you're actually out, we know very little about even the basic biology, the lifespan, how the survival of individuals in a population, even species. I'm still naming species. I've still got papers coming out naming new species, and I know ones that still need to be named. So I would say basic biology, basic ecology, information like that is there's still so much to do, and the vast majority of the dragon lizards, like most Australian lizards, we know very little about. Yes.
The body protector helps or hurts with these things for the knowledge of them, but also active animals.
The question was, does the exotic pet trade help the animals through knowledge, or is a problem for them? I think a bit of both. I think it's fantastic. People love the animals and learn about them and have an interest in them. However, there is problems with illegal collections. And we're actually now very careful about when we describe a species, particularly one where it's likely to have conservation concern. we actually don't publish the specific localities because there is there does seem to be a trade and a market in getting the unusual species without regard for the conservation of that species. So I think it's a bit of both. I think it's fantastic people have an interest in them and want to keep them, but on the other side, the illegal collection of species, particularly ones that are vulnerable, is not so good. Right. The question is, if someone was to travel to Australia, where they might go to see some of these lizards. First thing is to go in later spring and early summer, because dragon lizards don't like the cold. You don't see them in winter. If you go to Brisbane, Sydney, you can see water dragons. You can go to the down to Darling Harbour in Sydney. There's a Chinese garden there. They're all around in the Chinese garden. The Botanic Gardens in Brisbane, even down on the river down, you can see beautiful big water dragons there. So you can see them just in the cities, some species. Some of those more arid zone species, if you go out to Alice Springs, there's actually an Alice Springs Desert Park there that you can see some of the local lizards at, which is a fantastic place to see them. And then if you go up to Darwin, you'll see frill-necked lizards and some of those tartar lizards just out and about in the suburbs of Darwin. So you can see them different places. I can see a question up, a few. The question was the land care group I worked with in the Darling Downs, if based on my research changed their practices in either reserving land or grazing, things like that. That was actually right in the Darling Downs there is mainly cropping land rather than grazing land. And they had been working, before I went there and named the species, they had actually been working with some of the national parks people up there to promote changing tilling practices. So the smaller landholders there were actually the ones that were very interested in this actually went to a no or low till practice, which means they're not tilling the ground like they would normally do. And for weed removal, instead of burning, because often the tradition was to burn at the end of the growing season, and so instead they would slash weeds. And this helped the lizards to actually survive in the area a lot. So they were quite active in changing agricultural practices. One of the problems is there's big commercial companies coming and buying up some of these small holds and making large monocultures with laser-leveled fields. And so it's this contrast between the smaller landholders and the big commercial interests coming into the area. Yes, question. Yes, Hugh. Yes, that's right. So when you describe a species, you actually describe it with a scientific name. And you might have seen me checking what they were called, and that's because I'm not sure on the common names. I usually use the scientific names, and I didn't want to confuse people by using the big long scientific name. But these days, usually when I name a species as a scientific name, I also give it a common name, so that gets set, because otherwise you end up people using 10 different common names for the same species. Yes. The question is, can I tell you a bit about the evolution of the dragon lizards? Are they from a single ancestral species, or what it is? Do you mean the agamethes across the world, or just the Australian ones? They are a single radiation, so they came from a single migration event into Australia, and they are a subfamily. And there is one member of that subfamily that occurs outside Australia, and that is the Chinese water dragon. So the Chinese water dragon is the closest relative to the Australian and Papua New Guinean radiation, and it's the only one found outside the Australasian area. And it's assumed that the ancient ancestor of the Australian ones was something like the Chinese water dragon and migrated down to Australia. Does that answer the question? Okay. Yes. I didn't get into those kind of details. I generally use genetics research. So at Museums Victoria in Melbourne, we have a DNA lab. So we bring back a little bit of the lizard, like a little tail clip, and we can do DNA on that. And from that, we can work out whether it's a new species or it's, as I gave the example of the ring-tailed dragons, just one that looks a bit different. And then once we have that information, then I can start looking at what they look like, their morphology, because you want to be able to, when you see one out in the field, you want to be able to tell what species it is, and you do that by what they look like. So, one more question, I'm told. Right up the back there. Do you mean as in increasing surface temperatures just during the day or through time? Okay. Okay. The question was, I talked about collecting data on temperature and thermoregulation and how I collected the data. So I did it a couple of ways. I had thermometers, surface thermometers, and took temperature of the actual surface the lizard was sitting on. I also took the air temperature, and then also the internal body temperature of the lizard, which is like taking a person's temperature, same for the lizard. So then we caught enough lizards that we could look at that during the day. So what we saw was that in the morning, the lizards selected the warmest area to sit in to warm up. And then as the day increased and the temperature got hotter, the environmental temperature got hotter, they then started to select areas that were cooler than the ambient temperature. So they're animals that are called shuttling heliotherms, that big word, but what it means is they manage their body temperature by moving around their environment. So they can't control their temperature internally like we can.